Chapter 2. About 3 parsecs, or a little over 900 trillion kilometers from the planet Galimar, in an unremarkable solar system locally referred to as the Pantheon, consisting of only 7 planets and a lot of moons that have never been colonized, there lives a planet that is fairly commonplace in terms of its appearance. About 50% of its surface is water, which obviously means the other half is land. The land masses have the typical graduations between hotter climates of the deserts to those that are more tropical and green. The oceans are uniformly green in hue. This planet is commonplace and really wouldn't merit much of a second glance except for the fact that it happens to be in that narrow band of distances from its sun, where the water is neither boiling off into space, nor is it solid ice, never to melt. It also happens to be the right size, thus generating enough gravity for its atmosphere to remain against the surface, and at its core is a rotating mass of molten iron, resulting in a magnetosphere, responsible for protecting the planet from cosmic rays and solar winds coming from its yellow dwarf sun. For these reasons alone, it might merit more inspection by a passing race, just to see if perhaps it has even a trace of life. Most planets like this have no life, but some do. This planet, though, not only has life, but it has an enormous supply of it. Its most remarkable feature happens to be that one of those life forms is not only a bipedal race, but that race is what can be classified as intelligent. This newly industrial civilization has progressed to the point where its more learned individuals are only now embarking on a wonderfully varied journey of discovery into many different disciplines of science, including the biological, geophysical, and chemical world around them. Some of the centers of civilization have begun to use new inventions, to them at least, that allow for locomotion, as opposed to using animals to carry them from one place to another. This race calls their planet Traxus. The history of Traxus up to this point is one that is rather similar to that of many other planets that have intelligent life. Throughout time, there have been many occasions on Traxus where the repeated ebb and flow of political history played its well-known song, a ballad where certain groups of Traxians would segregate themselves from other groups and then claim their socio-economic philosophies are better than that of the other groups on the same planet. These groups generally would find themselves clustered according to natural geographic features on the planet, and, as is typical with such young civilizations, such attitudes are the basis of many bloody conflicts that have occurred over many millennia. Not all of those on Traxus act the same way, though. While most Traxian people have a more combative and warlike mentality, there are some who seem to naturally rise above the murmur of racial grandstanding. For one reason or another, these individuals seem to find themselves among the more cultural and philosophical populace, and so they are doing their best to shape the minds of young ones in the universities, to see that science and discovery is the one and only way that a person can find true fulfillment in life, and not with the competitive nature of nationalism and the inherent rise and fall of different arrogances and ideals. They have no idea that, by living their lives in this way, they have taken on the same force actuating their minds as more enlightened races in their same galaxy. Resistance to such change has been formidable, and revolution towards enlightenment has been slow in coming, but it has been steady. About 70 years prior to the events of this story, there was a landmark treaty that had been signed between the countries of Traxus that essentially stopped most of the conflicts on the planet. It was agreed that the conflicts were causing an unbelievable amount of suffering on the part of those who had no way to fend for themselves, and that something had to be done about it. It was at this same time that some of the major political alliances had the ability to completely destroy each other, thus creating a framework for what many referred to as mutually assured destruction. What made it particularly unnerving was that these countries had the ability to launch a devastating attack on their enemies, but none of these ideological groups possessed the ability to perfectly defend themselves from an equally destructive attack coming their way. A peace treaty was obviously needed. Such a treaty eventually did come into existence, though. The treaty was called the Treaty of Vordun, named after the island where it was signed. This island was a designated land that was owned by none, and so it was a place of common ground for all nations. Locations on the island for meetings and negotiations were created, allowing for the peaceful coexistence of the people of Traxxas. The tenets of the Treaty of Vordun all center around 6 basic rules. Number 1. All military actions occurring at the time of the treaty would immediately cease. Number 2. All arsenals for each nation would be decreased to, at most, only 10% of the current stockpiles, while at the same time, the stockpiles had to be equal among all nations. Number 3. All existing non-contested borders would be honored by all nations. Number 4. Any borders that were contested at the time of the treaty would be divided vertically, north to south, without consideration to natural resources or topography. Number 5. A central organization called the United League of Vordun, or ULV for short, would be established where all nations would consistently meet and air out any differences. Number 6. Where there was a disagreement between nations that could not be resolved, the different sides of the disagreement would be presented to the uninvolved members of the ULV body, and the body would pass a binding ruling on how the difference would be settled. The ruling would be decided by simple majority vote. Animal and plant life are remarkably diverse on Traxxas. There are animals that range from very intelligent small animals that are no larger than one's finger to simple-minded animals that are larger than some of the trees of the planet. Life can be found on not only the land masses, but under the surface of the oceans as well. Aside from an amazing biodiversity in the oceans, there also happens to be an intelligent race of beings that live exclusively under the sea. However, the Traxians that live on land have yet to discover this peaceful race. This oceanic race does, of course, have a name, but that name can't really be pronounced unless you have water flowing past your vocal cords. It basically sounds like the Colwynds, but not really. One thing that makes the land-based Traxian people different from a lot of planets is that there are not just 2 specific genders to its people, but there are actually 3. When procreating, one gender, that some might call male, contributes the equivalent of sperm, while the second gender, that could be called female, contributes the egg. These 2 genders deposit their contributions into the third gender, which is known as remale, where the fertilized egg will incubate and be carried until the child is born. For this reason, all 3 genders can rightfully be considered parents to the child. Marriage unions generally start out as a union between any 2 of the 3 genders that find themselves in love, but eventually, those 2 will add a member of the third remaining gender to their union once someone is found that they both have fallen in love with. There are times when a couple decide that having a child isn't really important to them, and in those cases, the remaining gender is never sought. Names on Traxxas also take a little getting used to. The family name always comes first, then the personal name. If you see the name Tenovis Vinblane, the names of all members in their immediate family start with Tenovis, but the personal name of that person is Vinblane. Also, each personal name will start with a prefix, which indicates their personal gender. Bar is the prefix for males. Vin is the prefix for females. And Ren is the prefix you will always find in the names of remales. So, in the previous example, you automatically know that Tenovis Vinblane is female. Our story begins on a day that is mostly like any other, except for one very important difference. Today, scientists in this barely industrial civilization of Traxxas will try to determine the origin of a very strange device. A device that doesn't seem to have originated from anywhere on the Traxian planet. Hey fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.